This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Corenna Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Now joining us in studio is Republican Gubernatorial Candidate Owen McCarthy. Welcome to the program.
I'm excited to be here.
So, Owen, I know a little bit about your story, but why don't you tell the rest of us?
My story actually begins about 100 miles north of here in Patten, Maine. I grew up in a trailer on my grandfather's land in the shadow of Mount Katahdin. My dad was in the logging industry. There was a third generation logger. My mom worked in the schools as a lunch lady. And growing up in Patten, Maine, you learn a lot about living in a community. You learn a lot about hard work. I used to watch my father go to work at about 2 a.m. every morning. And then he'd come home about 6 p.m. In the spring, maybe closer to 4 p.m. and he'd coach baseball. And he'd always spend time with the family and sleep about 4 hours every night. And so you see hard work. You also grew up in a community where if you go to the grocery store and you don't say hello to someone in the aisle, your mom will get a phone call and be like, why is your son so snotty? So it's a great place to grow up. And I felt like growing up there when I did, we didn't come from a lot, but I had everything I needed and nothing really stood in my way. The schools in the state were fourth in the country at the time that I went through them. I went on to the University of Maine, which was a really important time in my life. I went there on the Pulp and Paper Scholarship, studied engineering on the Pulp and Paper Scholarship, and learned a lot about how to solve a problem and think about the inputs and the outputs and come up with solutions to move things forward, which I think is a really important skill to have. I then went on to work in the paper industry. I've been to every single paper mill in this state except for the one in Madawaska, Twin Rivers, which we will fix, even if Holly and I need to vacation up there to go fix it. Holly's my wife. And then I became an entrepreneur. I've started multiple companies, all in high tech, one of them in 3D printing. The most recent one, MedRhythms, is a medical device company. We launched it actually in Boston, me and my co-founder, who's from West Enfield originally, for the first 6 months of the company's life. And then we decided we wanted to do it in Maine. So we moved it to Maine. We build medical devices to help people improve their walking if they have a stroke or they live with Parkinson's disease. And we actually use the science of how rhythm and music can help people walk better. And we've taken a concept from idea through clinical trials. We've run 6 of those through the FDA, on to get a Medicare code for people. The product is prescribed and used in people's homes. We've raised about $60 million of venture capital into the state of Maine, hired a lot of people here, and it's been a great experience. All the while, because of how impactful higher ed was on my life. And for me, the engineering program at UMaine is one of the best in the country. I wanted to continue to get back to that. So was involved in the Board of Visitors. I chaired that for a while, involved with the trustees. And it was really there where I looked around and I said, well, I don't think the next generation has the same opportunity that I had coming from here in rural Maine. I don't know where they're going to afford to buy a house. I don't know where they're going to get a job that pays enough to live here. And I don't think it's affordable for the working class Mainer to live in Maine. And that's what motivated me to want to jump in and run for governor. I come at this as an outsider to the political world, but an insider to Maine. I know Maine really well. I've been across the entire state. I have young kids myself, and I want to make sure that they're set up for success for the future. They're 5 and 2, Oliver and Theodore, and excited to tell you more about the things I'm thinking about and why I think we need a fresh approach and a new direction for the state.
Since you brought up the paper mills, what are your thoughts about the dam situation?
We need to do everything possible to make sure we have low-cost energy for places like Sappi. And I think if we can't protect those dams and keep them online, we could lose thousands of jobs in that area because of the ramifications of Sappi plus everyone else that buys things locally, et cetera. There was a really good economic impact study actually done by the Central Maine Growth Council and the Mid-Maine Chamber that I recommend people looking at. I think it's 1 or 2% of Maine's GDP could be impacted if those dams are out of place. So we need to, everything in our power to keep them operating is necessary. Plus, base layer energy is hard to come by these days, which is energy that's on all the time, unlike the intermittent stuff like solar and wind, which works sometimes and doesn't work other times. And so we need to keep as much of that capacity in the state also.
Do you have an energy plan?
Yes. Some background to the energy plan. We all know the costs have gone up the fastest in the country the last 5 years. 35% increase, which is double anywhere else in the last year. The consumer energy market in Maine is $2.5 billion, say that the consumers spend. $250 million of that is solar subsidies right now, so 10% of that. And that doesn't count the extra price per kilowatt that you have to pay for the solar energy. So for me, the energy plan is very focused on affordability for working class Mainers and so businesses could come here. One, you have to get rid of the solar subsidies. It has to stand on its own. I'm not anti-solar, but I'm anti-government propping it up. Two, we need to look for lower cost base layer energy. And there's really 3 ways to do that in a place like Maine. One of them is we need to buy more hydro from Quebec or other places. I know there's controversy over that, but it's 6 cents a kilowatt and it's there all the time and there's capacity, and that would impact and help other ones. 2 is we need to build more natural gas pipelines. The problem with that, all of these are like diplomacy related issues because I need to go get Massachusetts to agree to build a pipeline. But with a very friendly federal government on this issue, you have more levers now to convince them to build a pipeline into Maine. And then 3 is in the medium term, because it takes 5 to 7 years, the technology in nuclear, and I've spent a lot of time, given my engineering background, diving into the technology, is changed, it's safer, and it's ready to come back. If we want to generate our own low-cost energy in the long term and be competitive, we need to start permitting and bringing these projects forward now. It's a complicated issue because there's 330 pieces of legislation that's been passed in energy in the last decade. One of the things on a go-forward basis, I want to make sure all legislation and energy that comes forward has a ratepayer statement of impact on it. So we analyze what it will mean to the average Mainer for any of these changes and have that be part of the discussion, because I think that's really important, because if we need to measure what we're managing, that's helpful. And then the energy office, our friend Matt Jacobson in Portland always says it doesn't have anyone that's worked in the energy industry in it right now. In my mind, all policy is fine on a whiteboard, but people are really policy, the ones that bring it to life. So you need to bring a good team that's worked in the energy industry. You probably need some lawyers, but I always hesitate to say that because we have plenty of lawyers, but there's some complicated legal ramifications there. And you probably need some engineers in that team to put together. That's the way we get to the point where we can really cut energy costs for average Mainers and then also make it competitive to recruit businesses here.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Republican Gubernatorial Candidate Owen McCarthy.
A conversation that we had with the Deputy District Attorney for Penobscot County, we were talking about crimes being committed and people not being held accountable and also being released on cashless bail. We've had cars stolen, we've had wheels stolen, and nobody seems to ever be accountable for what's going on. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks for that question. I have a story of my own also to share. I interviewed in downtown Bangor, Dale Hart, who has a location down there. And he had someone get attacked in front of his office. He has on video. And then he had someone pull a knife on him while he was walking. And I asked Dale, I said, well, did you call the cops? What did you do? And he's like, no, I didn't call the cops. I'm like, why didn't you call the cops? And he said, well, because I know they're working hard and I know that they care, but as soon as they go in, they just get let back out. So I've just stopped trying. And that's the place we've gotten to with society. What can we do about that? One is, you nailed it on the cashless bail. That is a major problem. If you just have a rotating cycle of people that are coming in and out of the jails, you're going to have an offender that could have 20 offenses. And, they could actually have a mental health issue that you need to deal with. And if you have the bail, you can hold them and get them into the right treatment and not just kick them out in the street. 2 is, I listened to a podcast, and I had heard about this before. You guys did a couple of times ago about the public defender crisis in this state. That's one that we need to have a fire drill on and fix and make sure we appropriate resource, and we charge the lawyers out there to take on more cases, and we staff the attorney's offices appropriately, and we fix that system, because similarly, people are being brought in, they don't have public defense, and they get kicked out. So that's another one to look for. I did an analysis, actually. It's not fully done, but we're comparing the Maine budget to the New Hampshire budget, which, by the way, is half overall from a spending perspective. But I looked at where we increased more than them and where they increased more than us. 2 of the areas that they increased more than Maine were in the police force. This is over the last 7 years, so it's a 7-year look, and in the district attorney's office. I don't know their outcomes fully yet, so we should dig into that. But they're taking this problem seriously. They're resourcing it appropriately relative to the overall budget. It's not a lot of money comparatively, but it will make a big difference to make sure that we have the right number of people out in the street to take care of the crime issue. Because as soon as people feel it's not safe, it's definitely not safe. And then people stop going there and it's a downward spiral.
Well, speaking of that, another podcast that we had, a couple of them was with Brewer Police Chief Christopher Martin, and he specifically stated that now in the Bangor market, instead of ounce, half ounce, we have kilo quantity methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, and it's trafficked by cartel gang members in the Bangor market. What are your thoughts on that?
Drugs are hammering all of our communities, and they've continuously gotten worse and worse, particularly as opportunity has moved out. They have moved in, and it's hit a lot of our generations. Things to do about that. One is we need to make sure, which we're not doing currently, we cooperate with the federal government on this. The DEA, FBI, all these places that have a bigger part of the picture. These cartels operate across borders, and we need to make sure that we're not fighting with them and we're cooperating with them. Related with any of these things, you need to hit them where the money supply is and figure out if you can go after real estate transactions, you can go after money, you can go after all these places, because if they can't transact the cash and then the money and operate out of a location, and I'm particularly thinking more about the Chinese grow houses on this one, as much as the cartels that you're talking about. The good thing is, I don't think it's fully appointed, but we're going to get a U.S. attorney for the state of Maine. Some of the challenges, Ben, is we haven't had anyone to prosecute them on these kind of international and national crimes. And so that's really strong. And finally, a good piece of momentum, and this is more national, we have strengthened the borders. So we have control over who's coming in and out of this country. That will have a ripple effect on these things. Also, back to where we started with the petty crime. Those crimes, stealing cars, are not petty, but the other types of crime, we need to resource and train and bring in more police officers into the state. That's important, particularly if you look at the rural areas. Some counties have a state police officer that comes in and out on more of a sporadic basis because of how we're staffed right now. I'm thinking like Washington County and Aroostook County, but there's still crimes and drug trafficking happening there. Those are some of the things you can do with that.
Since you mentioned the Chinese grow houses, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's remarkable to me that no one's talking about that. Steve Robinson, the Maine Wire, have obviously uncovered a situation where there's hundreds of homes in Maine that are owned by the Chinese that are growing illegal marijuana, ruining the housing stock that we have, largely using what it seems like slave labor to do it, undercutting the prices of the legal growers and growing it with bad chemicals. So it's bad for the people. And so it's hitting us economically. It's hitting us on the housing crisis. It's hitting us with our young people, and it's hitting the legitimate businesses. It's remarkable it's not talked about. And I think one of the things as governor you can do is you have the bully pulpit. You can talk about it and you can declare, like Oklahoma did, which they all scampered up here, that this is not the place to do this. And then back to my answer on cartels and crime, which is like you coordinate with the federal government, you strengthen the borders, you make sure you're staffed well enough for it. The U.S. attorney can prosecute on it. And from there, you can get pretty instant outcomes on this side of things. And then we got to refurbish the homes and get them back in stock on the other side of it, because we're 42,000 homes short in this state right now as we sit here.
Yes, actually, I think we're about 80,000 short.
Well, the report said we were 84,000 short, but that factored we want to grow, which we do, actually. I did my own math on this one. There's a units per household is what you look at. You're supposed to have 1.1 units per household, which is a healthy market. When you buy something, you can sell something. Right now, if you factor out the second homes, which is 20% of the market and 5 times the national average in Maine, we're 42,000 short. And then over the next 5 years, if we want talent to move in, you can make the argument that it's the 84,000 that the report came out with, which I think makes sense. We do want people to move in because we are the oldest state in the country. So we need people that are educators and nurses and builders. But yeah, it's a major crisis.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Corenna Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Republican gubernatorial candidate Owen McCarthy. Speaking of housing, what are your plans with property tax? How are we going to reduce the property taxes, which just continue to increase across the state?
This is the issue I think I hear about from the most people. Well, I hear about energy the most. Property tax, I hear about the second most. And I'll tell you a story. My Uncle Thump, who's in Patten, Maine, he's on Social Security. He's 77 years old. He was a truck driver and a logger. And because of energy, because of property tax, he couldn't live anymore. He didn't have the money to live. So he just bought himself a skidder and is back out cutting a woodlot, trying to make some money, which is terrible. He shouldn't have to do that at 77. It's probably good for his long-term health that he's out there. But it's dangerous work. Like cutting wood is dangerous work. It's hard work. With that, what to do about property tax? We have to look at the homestead exemption, and to raise that, double, even triple that, I think would be really helpful. because that basically is for people that have a primary residence in the state. It's their home. They live here, their main residence. You can get relief on your property taxes. It does shift it more to others that maybe have second homes. But given we have 20% of second homes in the state, for me, it's like, how do we take care of the resident Mainers as much as possible? I think that's a really good option. And 60% of town budgets on average is schools and schools funding. There was a chart I saw in February that showed increase in school funding wasn't exponential, but it was linear and growing. And results, which was the other direction and going down. I'm a big believer in education, but it has to work. We have a strategy problem. So if we want to go at property tax, it's how do we build a better strategy for education? And it can cost less and do more. And also look at the homestead exemption as how you'd go at property tax.
Oh, and obviously you're highly educated. How do you suggest we fix the education and our numbers really drop into the bottom?
Education is the lifeblood of our future. Like, there are going to be people that work here and they create jobs here. And this is, to me, a tragedy that we've gone from fourth to last. What I've been saying is we need to get back to the basics in education. And when I say the basics, I've been looking at our fourth grade reading numbers. Only about 30% of kids can read at grade level. And then if you can't read, you can't do math. If you can't read, you can't critical think. If you can't read, imagine what AI will do to you in the future, right? There's a lot of things that can happen. So the places that have made a big change on this, which we can borrow from people that have done it well, are places like Mississippi. They're 10th in the country now. And what they said, and this is going to sound basic and simple, but they passed a law that you can only teach curriculum that's proven to work, which I recommend that we do. In Maine right now, according to MEPRI, which is a nonpartisan research institute, 50% of the curriculum taught of the 100 schools surveyed was non-evidence-based, like proven not to work. And so we're teaching kids with things that doesn't work. So you make that change. You also focus on, from there, bringing in the latter, I'm a contradiction here because I don't like cell phones in school, but I also think we need to train people in AI and tech because that's what's happening. So we got to make sure that we limit in the high schools use of cell phones, but then bring in the ability to teach with the tools of the day. Right now, if you go to a lot of high schools, using AI is cheating. And I think given what I'm seeing in the workforce, they're going to be at a major disadvantage if we don't train them to do that. And then from there, I was talking with someone that's close to the federal administration, and they're talking about healthier food in the school lunches, which I think is important, and we can get some of that locally. They're talking about making sure people have enough recess time. And it might be counterintuitive because you want people in the classroom to learn, but you also need to get people out and the energy out so they can focus and learn. For me, really, the focus is back to the basics. Reading is really important. The science of reading is one of the things that Mississippi and others have done. And then we can build from there.
As a realtor, I've seen through experience how the shortage of tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, contractors, impacts homeowners and small businesses. What's your plan to strengthen the trades in Maine and make sure we have enough skilled workers to keep up with the demand?
It's something that is important for a couple of reasons. One is, as you stated, it's hard to find someone in almost any trade. Two, I brought this up before, but the world we're changing into, what's happening with artificial intelligence, actually, the trades are probably some of the safer positions to be in, and they're long-term jobs that will pay off and have a huge benefit for people's families. It's earlier integration as much as possible in the high schools and get people integrated in early. Two is, I was talking to an electrician the other day, and they said, oh, and the requirements to become an electrician are really stringent and really high. It's one of the highest barriers in the country for that. Could you look at that as governor? I said, yes. And could you consider making it easier to get started? And if you work on higher voltage stuff, to ramp it up? The licensure barriers to entry, I think, would be really important to look at on the trades. The reciprocity of other states is also helpful. Some of this is a symptom of we're the oldest state in the country, median age, 44. And we want to encourage people to move here because we're going to be able to grow some of it, but we're also going to need to move some of it in. And then some of it on the latter side is, while we build the pipeline, we need to think about innovative ways to do things. There's a lot of, if you think about homes, you mentioned homes, there's a lot of innovation happen in custom modular that don't look like a manufactured home. They look very professionally done and custom to that job. The more of that we can encourage in the meantime while we build up the trades, the more we can get houses out there into the supply.
Obviously, you must be aware of the problem we have in DHHS. A while ago, we did a fundraiser at Augusta store with Bill Diamond. Bill Diamond is no longer with us, unfortunately. Not sure who's going to pick up the baton there, but we got to do something with these children who are in foster care that are dying.
Well, first of all, Bill Diamond was a hero. He championed a cause of service beyond himself that is a worthy cause. Close to 150 kids have died in the care of the state. And also another one that's not talked about out there, which is remarkable to me, except for Bill Diamond making it an issue. I think we all owe it to Bill to solve this problem. Some of the things as you talk to Bill about solutions that I agree with and would do with this, DHHS is huge. It's the largest department. It's the largest part of the budget. There's a lot going on there. And this has not been a priority. So you need to pull it out and make it a separate department unto itself that has a goal that no kids are dying in the state's care. From there, there's a couple types of leaders out there. There's the peacetime leaders that like keep the trains running, etc. And then there's the wartime leaders, the ones that say like this isn't working and we need to do whatever possible to make it happen. We need to recruit in a wartime leader that has a high sense of urgency, is willing to break some stuff and willing to change how it is. And a lot of the ground level people are pretty good in that department. They just are afraid of the repercussions of either going outside the lines of the system or speaking up. So we need to both enable them to do that with that leadership and then train them better on some different approaches. Those are the types of things that would be important if you want to change this department and change it around. Because for right now, it's kind of merged in with DHHS. That's all a mess. And without pulling it out, you're never going to be able to manage it and move it forward.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 with Republican Gubernatorial Candidate Owen McCarthy. Make sure to tune in tomorrow, Sunday, November 16th at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, The Voice of Maine. You don't want to miss it.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.